Right now, at this exact moment, a West African military strongman is making a decision that could rewrite the entire continental power structure. And you have no idea it's happening. Mali's Assimi Goïta just accused Nigeria of orchestrating attacks on his territory, while simultaneously consolidating absolute control over his own nation. But here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't just about military conflict. This is psychological warfare dressed up as geopolitics. The accusations against Nigeria are strategic, calculated, and designed to do one specific thing: distract the world while Goita's regime consolidates power unchecked. What comes next will shock you, because the real threat isn't external, it's internal, and it's already too late to stop it. One of Africa's largest militaries is rapidly collapsing in real time, and almost nobody in the Western media is talking about it. The soldiers are disappearing, entire bases are being abandoned, and right now, at this very moment, armed groups are seizing strategic territory across the country. What you're about to see isn't just a local crisis. This is the template for how entire nation-states fall apart in the 21st century. Welcome back. I'm breaking down one of the most consequential geopolitical situations unfolding in Africa right now: the unraveling of Mali. If you're not familiar with Mali, let me paint you a picture. It's a massive country, about the size of the entire European Union, sitting at the heart of the Sahel, a band of semi-arid territory stretching across Africa. Historically, Mali was powerful. It was a hub for gold trade, Islamic scholarship, and regional influence. But for the past decade and a half, it's been descending into chaos. And what's happening there right now is about to get so much worse. The country isn't falling to a foreign invasion or a single unified military force. Instead, it's being torn apart from inside by a complex web of competing interests: ethnic insurgents, jihadist networks, a military consumed by internal power struggles, government coups, and foreign powers trying to maintain leverage in one of the world's most strategically important regions. Mali has become what experts call a failing state in motion, a country where state authority is collapsing so rapidly that the question isn't whether Mali can recover, but whether it will exist in any recognizable form in 5 years. But here's where the story gets genuinely alarming. What's happening in Mali isn't isolated. It's part of a broader security catastrophe consuming the entire Sahel region. And if you understand Mali, you understand where Africa's next major humanitarian and geopolitical crisis is coming from. Let's rewind to understand how we got here. Mali's instability didn't start overnight. For decades, the country has been plagued by a fundamental problem. It never developed a functioning state apparatus in the north. The northern regions are populated primarily by Tuareg people, nomadic herders and merchants who have historically resisted central government authority. The geography itself makes control nearly impossible. The Sahara Desert dominates vast swaths of Mali's territory, creating an ideal environment for insurgencies, smuggling networks, and armed groups to operate without scrutiny. Starting in the early 2010s, things began accelerating. Islamic extremist groups exploited this vacuum, establishing footholds across the north and center. Groups like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb or AQIM and various splinter organizations began recruiting, taxing local populations, and establishing parallel governance structures. By 2012, everything came to a head. A military coup toppled Mali's government, and simultaneously, Tuareg separatists launched an armed rebellion in the north. The situation spiraled so dramatically that by 2013, jihadist groups had begun marching south toward the capital, Bamako. At that critical moment, France intervened militarily. Operation Serval, launched in January 2013, was presented as an emergency measure to stop the jihadist advance and restore Mali's territorial integrity. For years, French troops held the line. Temporarily, the crisis seemed contained. But here's the crucial detail that most people miss. The French military presence didn't actually solve Mali's underlying problems. It just papered over them. Corruption continued. Governance remained weak. Ethnic tensions simmered. And the armed groups adapted. But that's not the full story, because Mali's military situation was about to become exponentially more complicated. Between 2020 and 2021, Mali experienced 2 military coups. Let that sink in. Within 18 months, the military overthrew the government twice. The first coup in August 2020 was led by junior officers who claimed the government was weak and corrupt. And frankly, they weren't entirely wrong. The second coup, in May 2021, happened when some senior military officers felt sidelined by the new government and decided to seize power again. This is where Assimi Goïta enters the picture. Goita emerged as a powerful figure in Mali's military after the coups and eventually consolidated power as the leader of the country's military government. On paper, he represented the promise of military stability, a strong man who could impose order on a chaotic country. But here's the critical problem. Military strongmen and effective governance are often mutually exclusive. Goita inherited a country that was already fragmenting, but instead of addressing the root causes, his administration made a fateful decision that would reshape Mali's entire security landscape. In 2022, Mali's military government dramatically expelled France from the country. French troops, who had spent nearly a decade fighting jihadists in Mali, were told to leave. In their place, Mali turned to Russia. Specifically, it contracted with the Wagner Group, a Russian private military company, and later its successor organization, the Africa Corps. This wasn't just a military arrangement. It was a geopolitical earthquake. Mali had severed its most significant military partnership with the Western world and replaced it with a Russian-backed force with a completely different approach, different tactics, and fundamentally different strategic interests. Here's where things get interesting. The Russian forces arrived with promises of superior tactical capabilities, better intelligence, and a more aggressive posture against jihadists. But what actually happened was far more complicated and far more revealing about the true nature of Mali's crisis. The transition from French to Russian military support was supposed to be a turning point. It wasn't. Instead, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Reports began emerging of Russian-backed Africa Corps units being ambushed by Tuareg and Jihadist insurgent groups. These weren't minor skirmishes. Entire units were being withdrawn, soldiers were being captured, and bases, which had been held for years, were being abandoned in rapid succession. The most shocking recent development? The capture of Kidal. Kidal is one of Mali's most strategically important cities. It sits in the northeast, and it's been a flashpoint for conflict throughout Mali's instability. The symbolic value of Kidal cannot be overstated. It represents state authority in the north. Losing it meant that armed groups had successfully pushed back not just French forces, but also Russian-backed units operating with ostensibly superior equipment and training. What happened to Kidal reveals something crucial about why Mali is collapsing. The armed groups fighting for territory in Mali have adapted and evolved. They're not just bandits or religious extremists operating in a vacuum. They're coordinated, strategically sophisticated, and increasingly successful at exploiting the weaknesses of Mali's government forces. Enter JNIM, Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin. If you haven't heard of JNIM, you should have. It's an alliance of various jihadist groups operating across the Sahel, and it's one of the most successful and dangerous insurgent networks operating in Africa today. JNIM isn't controlled by some distant foreign power. It's deeply rooted in local communities, embedded in ethnic networks, and crucially, it understands the terrain and the population in ways that foreign military advisors never can. JNIM coordinates with Tuareg separatist groups when it suits their interests, exploits ethnic divisions to gain local support, and uses the vast desert terrain to avoid direct confrontation with superior firepower. And here's where this becomes truly alarming. JNIM and associated groups are winning. When you see a military force losing territory rapidly, abandoning bases, and struggling to maintain cohesion, what you're actually witnessing is the collapse of state authority itself. Mali's military isn't just losing battles. It's losing the ability to project power across the country. And once that starts happening, everything unravels. Think about what a state actually is. At its core, a state is an organization that claims a monopoly on violence within a defined territory. When a government can't exercise that monopoly, When armed groups are running around freely, establishing their own courts, collecting their own taxes, providing their own security, then you no longer have a functioning state. You have a failed state. Mali is approaching this threshold. In the northern and central regions, government authority is essentially non-existent in large areas. Armed groups have filled that vacuum. They're not just fighting for territory. They're building administrative structures, recruiting soldiers, and establishing parallel states within the state. Some of these groups claim to be acting in the name of Islam. Others claim to be acting in the name of Tuareg national independence. Many do both, depending on who they're talking to. This creates an incredibly destabilizing situation because there's no clear endgame. The government can't defeat these groups militarily. The armed groups don't have the capacity to overthrow the government completely. And foreign military interventions, whether French or Russian, have proven ineffective at creating lasting political solutions. All they do is change which external power has influence while the underlying problem metastasizes. What happened next changed everything. One of the most overlooked aspects of Mali's crisis is the role of ethnic tensions. Mali is an ethnically diverse country. There are Bambara, Fulani, Tuareg, Songhai, and numerous other groups. Historically, these groups coexisted through various power-sharing arrangements and social contracts. But over the past 15 years, these relationships have deteriorated catastrophically. The Tuareg, particularly in the north, have long felt marginalized by governments dominated by southern ethnic groups. Tuareg separatism has genuine roots in historical grievances. But what's happened over time is that jihadist groups have instrumentalized these grievances. They offer Tuareg communities a chance to reclaim autonomy and dignity, while also providing military protection and economic opportunities through taxation and resource extraction. Simultaneously, the central government has responded to jihadist threats by supporting militias made up of other ethnic groups, particularly Fulani herders and Bambara communities, to fight against extremists. But these militias often operate without oversight, and they've been credibly accused of committing atrocities against Tuareg and other minority populations. This creates a vicious cycle. Government-backed militias commit abuses. This drives recruitment for jihadist groups, which then conduct their own operations, which prompts even more militia activity. You're not dealing with a simple two-sided conflict anymore. You're dealing with a complex, multi-sided ethnic and sectarian struggle where the boundaries between separatism, jihadism, and ethnic conflict are completely blurred. This is actually one of the reasons why foreign military interventions have been so ineffective. You can't bomb your way out of ethnic conflict. You can't create stability through military force when the underlying issue is competing claims to territory, autonomy, and political power. The Sahara Desert isn't just pretty sand dunes. It's one of the largest and most strategically important ungoverned spaces on the planet. Imagine an area roughly the size of the continental United States, where weak states are struggling to maintain control and armed groups are operating freely. That's your operational environment for jihadist networks and separatist movements in the Sahel. The desert creates what military strategists call sanctuary. Armed groups can move across hundreds of miles with minimal risk of interception. They can establish training camps, stockpile weapons, and plan operations without fear of aerial surveillance. When government forces do locate them, the insurgents simply pack up and move to another location. Meanwhile, the government forces have limited mobility, limited intelligence, and enormous logistical challenges in trying to pursue enemies across vast empty terrain. This geography is so important to understanding Mali's collapse that it can't be overstated. No amount of military technology can overcome the fundamental advantage that insurgents have when they control the terrain and understand it intimately. French forces, with their superior weaponry and air power, still couldn't crush jihadist networks. Russian forces, with their different tactical approach, also can't. The geography itself is almost as much of an adversary as the armed groups. Moreover, the desert enables smuggling networks, weapons trafficking, and the movement of fighters across borders. Mali isn't an island. It shares borders with Niger, Mauritania, Algeria, Senegal, Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, and Burkina Faso. Many of these countries are also struggling with security challenges. This means that armed groups aren't just Mali's problem. They're a regional network operating across multiple countries simultaneously. Here's where this gets even more complex. Mali's internal collapse is happening against the backdrop of serious international geopolitical competition. France was the dominant external actor in Mali for years, but that relationship has deteriorated dramatically. Mali's military government, particularly Assimi Goïta, has become increasingly critical of French involvement, accusing France of colonialism and failing to address the security crisis effectively. This resentment has genuine roots. But here's the problem with cutting ties with France. Mali needed some external support, and Russia saw an opportunity. Russia, through the Wagner Group and later the Africa Corps, offered Mali a different kind of military partnership. It came with fewer strings attached regarding democracy and human rights. It came with a more aggressive posture toward jihadists. And crucially, it was positioned as a way for Mali to assert independence from Western influence. Except it hasn't worked. Reports suggest that the Africa Corps, despite its reputation and despite Russian claims of tactical superiority, has been surprisingly ineffective against coordinated insurgent operations. Units have suffered significant casualties. Bases have been lost. And there's evidence suggesting that the Russia-Mali partnership is deteriorating as the security situation worsens rather than improves. But that's not even the full picture. Russia isn't the only external actor with interests in Mali. France still has influence, though it's diminished. The United States has military interests in the region. Arab states, particularly the Gulf monarchies, are involved in various capacities. The African Union is engaged diplomatically, and China is present through investments and infrastructure projects. This creates a situation where Mali's internal problems are being filtered through international rivalries. Instead of Mali's government and armed groups solving problems among themselves, those problems are being weaponized by external powers pursuing their own strategic interests. This almost guarantees that the conflict will persist rather than resolve, because external powers benefit from Mali remaining unstable and dependent on their support. While all this geopolitical maneuvering is happening, we need to stop and acknowledge what's actually occurring on the ground for ordinary Malians. This isn't just a story about military coups and jihadist networks. It's a story about millions of people whose lives are being destroyed. The conflict has displaced hundreds of thousands of people. Entire villages have been emptied as communities flee violence. The combination of jihadist attacks, government-backed militia abuses, and the general breakdown of security has made it nearly impossible for people to farm, do business, or move freely. Malnutrition is rising. Healthcare systems are collapsing. Schools are shutting down. Children are being recruited into armed groups. The United Nations and various humanitarian organizations have repeatedly warned that Mali is on the verge of a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. But these warnings have largely been ignored by international media and international donors, who are focused on crises in Ukraine, the Middle East, and other more immediate flashpoints. Mali's collapse is happening in slow motion, which means it's not getting the emergency response it desperately needs. And here's the brutal truth. Once humanitarian crises reach a certain level of severity, they become nearly impossible to reverse. You can't rebuild educational systems overnight. You can't restore health infrastructure that's been destroyed. And displaced populations, once they become dispersed, often never return to their communities. The social fabric of Mali is being torn apart, and there's no clear mechanism for putting it back together. Mali doesn't exist in isolation. What's happening there has massive implications for the entire Sahel region. Jihadist networks operating in Mali are connected to groups in Burkina Faso, Niger, and other neighboring countries. When armed groups are losing in one location, they often retreat to another, regrouping and planning new offensives. When they're winning, they push into adjacent territories. This is already happening. Jihadist groups linked to JNIM are increasingly active in Burkina Faso and Niger. Some reports suggest that insurgent networks in Mali are actually using the instability there as a springboard for operations in other countries. Niger, in particular, has experienced a dramatic deterioration in security over the past few years, and much of that can be traced to spillover from Mali's conflict. But here's the truly alarming part. If Mali completely collapses, if the government loses control of most of the country, then you have a massive ungoverned space in the heart of West Africa. That space becomes a sanctuary for jihadist networks, arms trafficking, drug smuggling, and every other illicit activity you can imagine. It becomes a staging ground for operations against more stable countries in the region. For the West, this is deeply concerning because these networks have repeatedly shown interest in targeting Western interests, both in Africa and beyond. For African nations, it's even more pressing because they bear the direct cost of instability. And for the people living in these regions, it means a deteriorating security situation that makes normal life increasingly impossible. Assimi Goïta is the central figure in Mali's current political situation, and understanding his position helps explain why the country's trajectory seems so dire. Goita is a military officer who seized power through coups, and like most military rulers, he faces a fundamental contradiction. He needs to maintain military support to stay in power, but military spending on a failing counterinsurgency doesn't win wars or build legitimacy. Goita has positioned himself as a nationalist who will restore Mali's sovereignty and defeat the jihadists. This plays well domestically among many Malians who are tired of foreign intervention and want strong leadership. But the reality is that Mali's military remains deeply fragmented. Different units answer to different commanders. Corruption is endemic. Training is inadequate. And the strategic situation keeps deteriorating regardless of what Goita does. His decision to expel France and turn to Russia was a strategic gamble. The calculation seemed to be that Russian military support would be more effective than French support, and that turning toward Russia would appeal to anti-Western sentiment among Malians and other African nations. The problem is that the strategic situation has continued to worsen. Military solutions alone cannot address Mali's underlying problems: weak governance, ethnic tensions, poverty, and the fundamental ungoverned geography of the Sahara. Goita faces what might be an unsolvable problem. If he continues the military approach without addressing political and social issues, the insurgency will persist. If he tries to negotiate with jihadist groups, he risks being seen as weak and losing support from the military and hardline nationalists. And if he tries to compromise with Tuareg separatists and other groups, he risks further fragmentation of the already fractious military coalition. What we're witnessing in Mali is textbook state collapse in motion. It follows a predictable pattern that scholars have identified across multiple countries. First, you have a decline in state capacity. The government loses the ability to provide basic services like security, justice, and infrastructure. Second, you have a rise in alternative authorities, armed groups, ethnic militias, jihadist organizations that fill the power vacuum. Third, you have the monetization of violence, where conflict becomes profitable for those perpetuating it, creating perverse incentives against resolution. Mali is well into this process. State capacity has declined dramatically. Alternative authorities have proliferated, and violence has become profitable for various actors. Some of these actors genuinely want to create a different political system. Others are just using the conflict as a means of enrichment. But regardless of motivation, the result is the same: fragmentation, anarchy, and the emergence of parallel power structures. The frightening part is that once this process reaches a certain threshold, reversing it becomes extraordinarily difficult. You can't just re-establish central authority through military means if the underlying political legitimacy has evaporated. You can't create governance capacity overnight if the institutions have been destroyed. And you can't eliminate armed groups if the conditions that spawn them, poverty, political exclusion, ethnic tensions, remain unaddressed. Mali is reaching this threshold. There's still time for interventions that could theoretically reverse the trajectory, but the window is closing. Every month of continued conflict further entrenches the alternative power structures and makes state reconstruction harder. So what happens next? There are several possible scenarios, and none of them are good. Scenario 1. Mali continues fragmenting. The north becomes increasingly autonomous, governed by Tuareg and Jihadist groups. The center and south remain under nominal central government authority, but with declining capacity. You end up with a country that exists on maps, but has little practical state authority in large regions. This resembles Somalia or post-2011 Libya, failed states that persist but don't really function. Scenario 2. A major jihadist organization emerges dominant and attempts to create a state structure, similar to what the Islamic State did in Iraq and Syria. This would represent a dramatic escalation in regional security threats and would almost certainly trigger military intervention from multiple external actors. Scenario 3. Mali becomes partitioned between different groups. This would require international negotiation and agreement, which seems unlikely given current geopolitical tensions. But it's theoretically possible that the international community might at some point accept Mali's de facto dissolution rather than continue trying to maintain it as a unified state. Scenario 4. There's a political settlement that involves power sharing, decentralization, and international intervention to rebuild institutions. This is probably the best possible outcome, but it requires a level of political compromise and international cooperation that doesn't currently exist. The most likely trajectory, given current trends, appears to be some combination of scenarios 1 and 2. Gradual fragmentation, with jihadist groups maintaining and even expanding control over significant territory while the central state survives, but with dramatically reduced authority and capacity. Here's what makes Mali's situation so significant beyond West Africa itself. Mali is a test case for how nation-states collapse in the 21st century. It shows us the limits of military solutions. It demonstrates how ethnic and sectarian divisions can tear apart a country if governance is weak. It illustrates how ungoverned spaces in the modern world become incubators for transnational threats. And it reveals how geopolitical competition between major powers can prevent effective international responses to state collapse. The pattern we're seeing in Mali, weak central authority, insurgent networks, foreign military interventions, ethnic fragmentation, humanitarian catastrophe, is repeating or could repeat across other fragile states in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. Mali isn't unique. It's just further along on a trajectory that other countries could follow. For the international community, Mali raises uncomfortable questions. Is state reconstruction even possible in countries with deep ethnic divisions and ungoverned territories? Can foreign military interventions create stability, or do they just substitute one form of chaos for another? And what are the obligations to populations in failing states? Do external powers have a responsibility to intervene to prevent humanitarian catastrophe? Or is that seen as an infringement on sovereignty? Mali doesn't have good answers to these questions. And increasingly, it seems like Mali is a place where questions don't matter because events are overwhelming choices. The state is collapsing. Armed groups are consolidating power. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating, and there's no clear mechanism for reversing any of these trends. The collapse of Mali is happening in real time, but it's not a sudden catastrophe that emerged from nowhere. It's the culmination of decades of weak governance, international competition, ethnic tension, and failed interventions. It's what happens when a country never develops the basic institutional capacity to project authority across its territory, and when the international system prioritizes short-term military solutions over long-term political reconstruction. The people of Mali are paying an enormous price for these failures. Families are being displaced. Communities are being destroyed. Children are being conscripted into armed groups. The state that's supposed to protect them has become irrelevant in large regions of the country. As you think about Mali, consider this. What you're watching isn't just African politics or a localized jihadist threat. You're watching the real-world process of state failure. You're seeing how the international system responds, or fails to respond, to the collapse of nation-states. And you're witnessing the geopolitical competition between major powers playing out through the destruction of a country and the suffering of millions of people. The question isn't whether Mali will recover. The question is whether anyone is actually doing anything to prevent total state collapse. And based on the evidence on the ground, the answer is increasingly no.